What's up, it's Brian here, and this is the first video in a 10-part video series that I'm doing on racism. So this is the introduction video to this series too. So I'm going to go over the purpose to this series, go over defining racism, and go over some things that I'm seeing right now in regards to the discussions on racism. So if you appreciate the video, like, comment down below your thoughts. That's always appreciated. So first, I just want to say that obviously this is a topic that I'm very passionate about. I mean, that should probably go without saying considering I'm doing a 10-part video series on it, but I'm really passionate about it. And I want that to be conveyed through the series too. You know, obviously I have a mixed race child, but it's not even really about that. I mean, even prior to that, I was passionate about not seeing people being hated or bullied or discriminated against for something that they can't control, something as shallow as skin color. That just bothers me. Like, I genuinely hate when people are judged for something that they can't control, or pretty much when people just judge someone without knowing them. You know, that's all racism is, and there's correlations to sexism there, and pretty much anytime you judge someone from an outside thing, I just can't stand that. I hate that. I don't say hate very often, but I hate that. And I really want to encourage people through this too, to just, if you have thoughts on racism and you're passionate about it too and you're knowledgeable, then please share your perspectives. You know, there's always going to be someone out there that's going to disagree with you, that's maybe going to hate you or that sort of thing, but you have to be okay with that. You know, silence helps no one. So really share your perspectives if you feel like it would benefit the world. And you also have to be open to constructive feedback too. Like for me, I'm very open to feedback. You know, I want to grow as a person. So if you come at me with a different perspective, I'm very open to that. You know, don't come at me in a condescending way like I don't know what I'm talking about. Because obviously I wouldn't put forth this video series if I didn't feel like I was pretty informed on the topic too. So keep that in mind. And I do want to say too, this is just my opinion. So I'm not saying I'm right with 100% of the things that I'm saying, but it is my beliefs. You know, and that should honestly go without saying. Because anytime someone speaks words out of their mouth, that is just their opinion, right? But I just want to say that up front. If someone gets the wrong impression, like I'm saying I'm the expert on racism or something like that, I'm not saying that. I just feel like I'm knowledgeable enough and my mindset is built a certain way and my character is built a certain way that I feel like the things that I'm going to talk about are going to be valuable to you watching this. And I'm aware that racism has been a hot topic lately, especially the last several months, but that doesn't mean that it's been productive. You know, I'm not really seeing many people bring solutions to the table. I'm seeing a lot of cookie cutter talk, fluff pretty much. I mean, one example is, I don't want to call Joe Biden out, but I'm going to call Joe Biden out. I'm pretty sure he can handle it being the president. So he said the other day, and he talks often about systemic racism, right? I've never seen him actually define it, let alone talk about solutions to it, which is just ridiculous. And I'm seeing a lot of that nowadays. You know, people, maybe celebrities might post on social media like a 2-minute video or something acting like they're doing something. They're not doing anything. You know, saying stuff like, I stand with so-and-so group, or I am an ally, or racism is bad, or let's unite to end racism. That's not contributing anything positive to the conversation whatsoever. You know, in 2020, we as a society seem lost on how to address racism. If that wasn't so disappointing, that would be laughable. You know, so keep in mind too that basic psychology tells you you cannot tell someone to not be racist and then that gets them to not be racist. Right? That seems to be where the conversation's at. We're like, just shout to the sky that don't be racist, and then that's going to solve the problem. It won't. You can't be lazy. You got to put in the mental work to try to tackle racism and help us reduce it in this world. And another reason that I'm putting up this video series, because I'm just seeing so much confusion and distortion out there when it comes to tackling racism and trying to reduce it in the world. And honestly, a part of the problem is that some of the so-called leaders in the anti-racism movement are kind of delusional themselves and have racist tendencies. So for example, the dude who wrote the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, I've seen some interviews from him, I've seen some things that he said on Twitter, that sort of thing, and he says way too often that white people are superior, and he's even called black people savages, and he insinuates often that black people have a handicap on them pretty much because of their black skin. Really disempowering stuff. And I'm not taking him out of context. You know, because he's not saying these things always in the context of someone else said this, like I'm doing, right? I'm saying like he said this. He says a lot of this stuff in terms of like, this is how the world is. So it's just really backwards logic, and it's almost regressive, which I really don't think is productive in reducing the racism in the world. Also, the author, I forget her name, but she wrote the book, White Fragility. The book is pretty much like saying, if you're scared to talk about race as a white person, then you're racist or something. But anyway, I've seen some interviews from her. I've not read the whole book, but I've seen some segments on the book. And she has really backwards logic, and she's pretty much just talking about her own racism and assuming every white person is as racist as she is. So it's very discouraging that people like this are kind of on TV news stations doing interviews and that sort of thing. And it's really confusing a lot of people. Another thing that is adding to the confusion is something called critical race theory. So this is a really backwards theory, and it almost encourages racist thinking also by looking at everything through the lens of race. It's really regressive. And it really promotes collective guilt and collective disadvantage also, which is just so unnecessary and counterproductive, honestly. And tied to this too is diversity in a misguided context. So the misguided context sometimes is people thinking, well, just combine a white person and a black person and an Asian person and people of different races together in a room, and then it becomes diverse. Which is just racist because then you're saying that people are inherently different because of their skin color, which is the definition of racism, as I'm going to go into later in the video, right? So it's just so backwards. Everyone is a unique person. Just because you're of a particular race does not mean you think the same, does not mean you are the same. That should be pretty obvious, but that's getting lost in the conversation a lot right now. So there's so much distortions, right? And you may be thinking, like, Brian, I understand, but is this really going on? Like, is this that big of a deal? And I would say yes, and you need to do some more research, because mainstream media a lot of the time, they talk about this stuff very shallowly on the surface, right? Cookie cutter talk, but they don't tell you the truth all of the time. They don't show the actual negative stuff of what's going on. And this is a big deal. This is a big deal because those two books that I referenced earlier, they are literally being on the recommended list from TV stations. Companies are putting them on lists for their workers to read. Schools are putting them in schools. So your kids might be getting brainwashed right now as we speak. Like that one, that dude who wrote How to Be Anti-Racist, he's a teacher at Boston University. So like this is a big deal, and it's becoming more mainstream. And if we don't wrap our head around more positive ideas, get out of this BS, it might be on the verge of getting pretty big, and then we can't control it, right? So there's a lot of good-hearted people right now that are getting wrapped up in this nonsense, and you need to look clearer to it, right? A lot of these people who think they're fighting racism, they're not. They're not. Like, if you're serious about reducing racism, you have to think very self-critically about all of these things and think hard on it. So that's why in this video series, I'm going to go really deep with it. To preview the videos going forward, they're going to be about kind of going over the racial spectrum of people and how to identify what racism is. Also, how to not be racist yourself towards other people and to yourself, and having a self-hatred, and also how to reduce individual racism in people, how to reduce group or systemic racism, and just how to reduce racism in general. So very deep topics that I'm going to go over, and hopefully it contributes something positive to the conversation. So now I'm going to go into defining racism. So when I typed it in on Google, there was two definitions that popped up. One I'm not really going to use in this video series, but one I will. So the one that I'm going to use is way more straightforward and just cuts right to the point. So that's the belief that different races possess distinct characteristics, abilities, or qualities, especially so as to distinguish them as inferior or superior to one another. So that's the definition of racism that I'm going to use. Pretty much like discriminating against or viewing someone as inferior simply because of their race. And another thing that I want to add with this is a lot of times people put power into the conversation on racism. So I think power does play into systemic or group racism. Like, you need power for that. But on an individual level, I don't think that you do. And I'll mention too, of course, like if you have power and you're being racist, then that's more destructive. So this kind of goes into like the difference between racist actions and racist words, which I think is a very important conversation too, because I'm seeing a lot of focus right now on racist words, which of course we need to reduce that. But it's like you're focused on just catching everyone who slips up and maybe trying to take a quote out of context to prove that someone is racist or all that stuff. That's taking all the energy away from actually focusing on the racial actions of people and the actual thing that's really harming people. Because like both are important, but you gotta acknowledge actions are way more important in terms of attacking than words. So keep that in mind too. So like I said, the power dynamic is just for systemic racism, but on an individual level, you don't really need power. And the reason why is you need to recognize that poor people can be racist. And if you acknowledge that, then you recognize, look, anyone can be racist, right? Like, we kind of all understand that there's poor people out there of all races that are racist in certain contexts. So knowing that, it's like you don't need power on an individual level to be racist. And as I alluded to too, it doesn't matter what skin color you are. It doesn't matter how much money you make. It doesn't matter your political party. It doesn't matter if you have a partner of a particular race. It doesn't matter any of that. You can be racist, right? You have to be open-minded to that. You have to be open-minded to that and self-reflect on the biases that you have. If you have any generalizations, or if you have stereotypes in your head already of people just because of their skin color, right? Like, even for me, I'm open-minded to I can be racist. You know, I'm open-minded to I can be anything in this world. I really take this quote that I mentioned in a past video to heart by Maya Angelou. I love this quote. It was, "Nothing human is alien to me." So simple, but I really take that to heart. I had the capabilities inside of me to be anything, positive or negative, and I can choose what to be. You know, so like I said before, come at me, please, with constructive feedback, and because I'm really concerned with my own self-growth, and I want to encourage you to be concerned with your growth also. And that's a reason in this video series, I'm not going to reference too much about black people or white people or that sort of thing, because I'm talking about racism in general towards any group of people, right? And I'm also concerned about your growth. So whatever skin color you are, I'm concerned about you. So for example, in the future video that I'm doing in this series on how to overcome racism, if you're Indian, I'm talking about racism towards Indian. If you're black, I'm talking about racism towards black, right? Just fill in the race that you are so it's more productive for you. So keep that in mind too. This video is for everyone because racism exists in all forms. So in this video series too, I'm going to talk about the umbrella of racism. So I want to mention that. So everything is not racism exactly, but it's tied to it. So it might be like prejudice or discrimination or generalizing people or having biases or bullying, right? So it's the umbrella. So if you're confused in a future video, like, Brian, that's not really racism, that's prejudice. Well, I'm talking about the umbrella here. And I'll really try to define words clearly throughout the video series and, you know, provide context on which word of those that I'm referring to. But at the end of the day, I really am just sick of the semantics battle nowadays, and everyone kind of concerned with like saying the right thing and like tiptoeing around the words around racism. I'm just sick of that because it's so unproductive. Like, at the end of the day, just have the framework like, is this positive thinking or negative thinking? Is this productive or unproductive? Is this hurting people or helping people? You know, if you have that framework, then I think all the semantics talk, you'll realize it's just kind of BS at the end of the day. So I really look forward to this video series, and you probably know by now, this will not be a cookie cutter series, right? I'm gonna go deep into it because I'm just sick of all the shallow talk around reducing racism in the world and fighting racism and trying to identify who's racist and who's not. It's just so shallow, and so much of the stuff that I'm hearing, it's just BS, and I'm just like, what is going on here? So I really want to contribute my authentic perspective to this conversation, and I hope that it's valuable to you watching this. Subscribe if you vibe.